Hi, and welcome to the Green Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amy,
And my name is Sarah.
and we are your podcast hosts. So today we have a little bit of an interesting spin on our podcast. We're not really going to talk about anything that's really specific to healthcare, but I guess it is. Um, and this kind of came, I guess, out of interest of a case that's kind of similar to our own, or I guess that has happened in our province of Ontario, and really just I'm kind of a true crime guru because I don't know, I just love cold case files and all of those, like the first 48, and we're going to talk about nurses who kill, but maybe before we do that, we do our little weekend update. So, Sarah, what have you been up to?
I went stand-up paddleboarding this weekend, so that was fun. And I realized yet again that it was really fun. And I realized yet again that I need to work on my upper body strength. My arms and my hands were just killing me afterwards, but it was really fun. And I learned that it's all about balance and just figuring out, your paddle situation. So it was a really nice day too. So I'm glad I was able to do it. I went on Sunday and we went to the beaches because the place there offered a half an hour lesson. So the place that I went last weekend to do the kayaking didn't offer lessons. And my friends were like, let's just watch YouTube. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to learn properly because what I saw last week was this girl that kept falling off her board and like having to sit back up and like hoist herself up. So I really wanted to do it properly. And none of us fell. So I think it was worth the extra time and money.
Look at that. So are you like a paddle board standing up pro now?
Well, I like to think 10 steps ahead all the time. And I'm like, if I can balance on this board, maybe I could go surfing one day. I don't know if this is too much of a stretch, but I just had this vision. I'm like, maybe I could just like take it a step further and go surfing and just like run into the water and, like, I don't know, ride some waves one day before I get too old.
Okay, you'll never get too old to be able to do something like that. I've seen people. Well, when I used to be able to go over to the states and see people in Florida, like you see people of all ages, kind of out doing that stuff. So, and you probably got really good genes. So don't worry
Plus,
about
when you're
that.
really short, I feel like that helps with your balance. So it's not like I was that.
Your center of gravity is
Yeah,
low.
and the thing is, it was really funny, but kind of sad at the same time. They actually gave me a youth board because of my height.
Oh, you got the kiddie
I
board.
did. I did get the kiddie board, but I think it helped me though. And then I was thinking, like, when my kids get older, it'd be nice if we could do something like that together one day.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be pretty neat.
hmm
Did you see any kids out there at all, or?
there weren't too many people in general doing the paddle boards. I did see some kids doing the canoe, but I would say they were at least 10. Probably the youngest I saw looked about 10. hmm So tell me about your weekend.
Oh, my weekend was pretty like low key. I'm trying to think. Like I've had my parents here for the past 2 weeks or so. Like I told you last week about my aunt, so they were kind of up here visiting and whatnot. But like we went. Oh yeah, we went to Niagara Falls yesterday. So I didn't. I kind of expected it to be busy, but it was literally impossible to socially distance. So we actually went for kind of like a little picnic. So we stopped at Costco, of course, and picked up like a chicken and a little salad, and we headed up to Niagara Falls. I had blankets and little snacks for the kids. So we did find a really nice spot, like under the trees and stuff. But after that, I was like, hey, maybe we can just walk the falls area and kind of go back to our car. So we kind of traversed across the street, and you actually couldn't socially distant. There was just it was like massive amounts of people. Like I've never seen it actually that busy. I was saying to my husband, I'm like, well, I guess I have to assume that all of these people are from Ontario or other provinces because I just couldn't believe how busy it was. And so what ended up happening is we took the kids to the bathroom and then we went home. because it was too many
Oh,
people.
that's sad. Was
And
it right near the falls, though? Were you just, like, within walking
we were
distance?
right near the fall, so we were pretty like, we were parked. I guess if we walked directly across the street, we were right by, of course, the Canadian side where the horseshoe
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
So it didn't matter. Like we just looked, how it's kind of like a straight line. As far as the eye can see, just people, like everybody was walking really close by and passing each other closely by.
Mhm.
I think I think if I was to stand with my arms out, I would actually be able to hit other people. So like it just was that busy. So I think we kind of got across the street and we looked and we're like, yeah, let's take the kids to use the bathroom and then we all head
Oh,
home.
that's too bad.
So
Well, I have to say, I
yeah,
think
but I
there's a big difference between weekdays and weekend because when I went the other day or the other week, it wasn't busy at all. It was really oddly quiet, and it was a Thursday and Friday.
no, this was like intense. And I guess I mean I think the whole idea behind social distancing and masking is that like if you can't maintain 6 feet that you should wear a mask. But I guess people have the idea that well we're outside so it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But what we quickly found out is you couldn't stay 6 feet away. So we were just like yeah let's just go. And I don't think there were actually any active cases um, in terms of reporting in Niagara. But I was like, heh, I'm not taking the chance. Let's just go home. So, but the picnic was nice. So we enjoyed the weather. It was a good weather on Sunday too. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, other than that, low key. You did hear that? Yes, I have resumed my jujitsu days, but I actually haven't done like an actual fundamentals or rolling class. It was more just like I guess they call it like a conditioning class, and it's solo. So it's like they have, I guess, these dots on the mat, so you stay 6 feet away from one another, and everything is done independently. So it was kind of like a conditioning yoga type stretching, balance, core. So it was actually really tough. I didn't expect it to be as hard as it was because I was like, oh well, I don't have to run around in circles. I don't have to fight anybody for half an hour. But it was like my core is still hurting. So I have something else to work on while I guess during this quarantine. So,
Nice.
but yeah,
Okay.
that that was my weekend. So
Okay, so let's get into our episode. And like you said, Amy, we're just going to switch topics a little bit than different than what we normally do and talk about nurses who kill. And I think before we even get into that, I know that true crime is really big these days, especially with, CSI and all those true crime shows. And I think people are more interested really in the psychology behind people who kill rather than the actual killing part. And what I found in my research is that there's sort of three different theories as to why nurses kill. One of them is that they believe that they are mercy killers, so that they believe their victims are suffering and calling for help, and that they're going to put them out of their misery. So they're doing them a favor. The second, mhm. The second theory is that they're just sadistic. They want to use their position and their power to exert control over their victims, and they get this rush when they do kill because it's just this satisfaction or this urge that they need to act out. And then the third one is what they call a malignant hero. So it's where the nurse endangers the victim's life in some way and then proceeds to quote unquote save them. And some of them will actually give them something that forces them to, code, and then they have to resuscitate them and they look like a hero in front of everyone. So I know it's messed up. So do you want to talk about one of your cases? One of the ones that you researched?
yeah, sure. Like I mean, one of the main ones that I kind of looked at was of course, because I'm interested in women and babies, I wanted to look at cases that might have involved, someone who was in obstetrics or someone who was in, I guess it would be like labor and delivery. And I kind of stumbled upon this nurse. I guess it was, so there's two cases that I saw. One was of a nurse that was, I guess it would have been in the like 1800s, and her name was Amelia Dyer. And it was estimated that she essentially killed approximately 400 infants. And really, I think they said that she was actually really only convicted of 12 deaths, but they were saying that the evidence suggests that her true body count was at least 400. Um, they said, like from various different sources I read, that her crimes kind of took place over a 20 years time span, in the late 1800s, and all of her victims were babies. So yeah, it's just kind of messed up that, I think essentially she was using opioid based substances and or smothering them. So it's just kind of really, I don't even see what, I guess the mold that this particular person, this particular nurse would fit in for me would be just sadistic, right? Like I don't, she wasn't trying to help or any of these kind of other, I guess it would be explanations as to why these people, or I guess motivations as to why these people did these things. But yeah, I found it was super super messed up.
I can't even
And
imagine
there,
what hospitals would have looked like that long ago, because 'cause I'm trying to picture how she could have gotten away with it, but I'm sure it's nothing like we have here. I'm sure there weren't that many nurses on 24 hours a day, and I don't know about even the type of care they provided or what kind of oversight there was. So it's just really interesting that she got away with it for so long.
or maybe there was a lot less oversight. Like who knows, right? Like I mean, I think things have drastically changed in terms of we have cameras, we have various different ways to check medications and various different things like that now, right?
Mhm.
So I think, like, I guess it would have been just a matter of that she had access and the ability to do it because there weren't as many people watching.
Yeah, and the other thing
But
about
there were,
nurses that kill is that it is so exceedingly rare. So I don't want anyone that's listening to think that this is by any means a common occurrence. And it's just so rare that when anything does happen like this, we're all just really fascinated about the case and trying to figure out why it happened. And I think that for these type of people, it doesn't matter what profession they're in. It's not like there's something about nursing that just makes people want to kill other people.
yeah, seriously. There was another case in terms of neonates, and this one was a little bit more recently. This was about, I guess, in the 1980s, and this particular nurse's name was Janine Jones, and her rationale, I guess, again, would have been the sadistic one, where she was saying she didn't kill the babies, the voices in her head did it. So clearly, someone who was very ill, obviously psychopath. She was a psychopath, and she had a confirmed, in terms of the confirmed victims, it says one, but they said that they suspect up to 60 victims. And again, she was, I guess, doing some of the similar things, like either giving them, I think it was sexacholine, or again, an opioid derivative to essentially poison and kill these poor neonates. So yikes, the fact that, I mean, this person was like, well, the voices in her head, she definitely
Mhm.
wasn't well. So
So I looked at a case that was actually a German nurse, and his name was Niels H. I didn't get his last name, but they said basically he created medical emergencies to show off his resuscitation skills and look like a hero. And at first, his colleagues just called him a bad luck charm. You know, someone that always happens to be on when things go wrong. I think we're all worked with people like that.
oh my god, yes.
So
Oh
so it
no.
was like people would say that, a code would be called, and he always happened to already be in the room resuscitating the patient by the time anyone got there, and people suspected him for a long time, but of course there was no concrete evidence, and, his history was that he first worked as a paramedic, and what the theory was that when he went from being a paramedic to being a nurse, he started out in a nursing home, and he didn't get that adrenaline rush anymore of saving people, so he then went to work in ICU. He actually worked in 3 different ICUs, and, what they ended up finding out was that his victims all had this cardiac medication called Adrenaline, which is usually used in emergency situations to control someone's heart rate, so basically to slow it down. And so if you inject it into someone who has a normal heart rate and they're not in an emergency situation, it slows it down enough that they might die. So, what they said was that about 30% of the people he did this to ended up dying. And it just so happened by chance that when he had called another one of his codes, one of the nurses walked in around the same time, and she looked in the garbage can and she noticed these empty vials of this cardiac medication. But but she didn't say anything. But then she noticed it again, and so it started to trigger some alarm bells. And then it says that he was eventually convicted, but they weren't really able. They actually exhumed a lot of the bodies, and some of the bodies showed traces of this heart medication, but the other ones were either too badly decomposed or they were cremated. So there was enough evidence though to convict him, and it was like he had killed so many people that he kept changing the number because he honestly couldn't remember how many people there were.
It's so messed
I
up.
know.
God, it's like it's actually horrifying because I guess the other aspect that we were kind of discussing was I guess the image that media sometimes portrays of nurses in various different roles and various different types of movies as well. Where like for example, there's like the nurse Ratchet where she's like the mean nurse and she'll do anything to kind of keep her patients at bay. Or there's like even like the horror aspect from like I don't know if you've seen like American Horror Story or Silent Hill where psychiatric nurses or hospitals tend to be like these very scary types of places, and they kind of have these nurses as images of like looking very satanic and demonic, and it's just like super super creepy. And
Hmm.
I don't know, like it's just sometimes even the media has a very sensationalized and they kind of take the character because of course nurses are um, of course in a place of power. So and I mean when I mean power it means that uh, particularly patients who come in are vulnerable, right? So if you're ill and you're sick and you have to be looked after, you are caring and trusting that this person is going to do the best for you, making sure that they're taking care of you, not actually going to harm you. So I mean like and then obviously with these various different roles or even hearing about these types of stories, well particularly true stories, it's quite horrifying and scary to know that you may come in sick and this person who's taking care of you might not actually be taking care of you, if you know what I mean. But of course like we said, it is absolutely rare.
Hmm. The scary thing about this German nurse is that because it happened more recently, it was in the early 2000s, they were able to pull statistics on, how many patients died under his watch. And it was, they said the death toll was double what it is normally, like when he was working
Wow,
versus when he wasn't working. So there were some red flags right off the bat.
that is messed up.
I know.
I had another one here, and I guess this would be because this particular nurse is kind of like a millennial. Her name was Daniela Pogali. I think she was Italian. And one of the things that kind of stood out about her in terms of her personality and just me reading a little bit about her was she actually allegedly had killed up to 90 patients on purpose because they were bothersome. So like definitely not the career to get into if you can't take a little bit of heat underneath the collar, in terms of patients may be bothersome or irritating or whatever the case may be. But essentially her reason or her rationale or motivation was because she thought patients were bothersome. And she did deny the charges. So this was around 2014. And I think they charged her with something like 96 different deaths during her time as a nurse. Um, but the other thing that I also found that was crazy is she took selfies um, with her deceased patients. So I mean, I can't imagine that she would present an innocence, I guess like pleading innocence, and then I guess they found all of these various really creepy and insidious selfies of the patients that she murdered. And I'm assuming like any sociopath, it's a form of collecting a trophy, right?
Mhm.
So like if you've heard of people like Jeffrey Dahmer or the Green River Killer, these people collect things, whether it's personal effects or items, or actually placing the body in a way where they can kind of go back and visit the scene of the crime or whatever the case may be. This particular nurse used the millennial aspect of taking selfies and took many selfies of her with these deceased patients. So I found that very, very
I
disturbing.
just got chills as you were mentioning what she did. That I don't even know what to say about that, but it's just crazy how she was also able to get away with it for so long, and I don't know what she did with the photos, if she sent them to anybody, but she must have done something with them, or maybe she just liked to look at
Probably.
them in her spare time.
Well, one of the things that I just about serial killers in general that I kind of, this is like my true crime hat coming out, that some of them tend to, like I said, they it's like they relive the experience of the fact that they've killed and harmed this person, and by looking at the photos, it's like them being able to experience that kill all over again. So that's why I said I think it's for her particularly, it was like a form of trophy collecting, which is like super super messed up.
Yeah, and with all of these killers, it's all really well thought out. They meticulously plan what they're gonna do. They have their weapon of choice. They have, they usually do it on the night shift because there's fewer people on night shift and you can get away with a little more. Um, so I think that it's not just, it's very different, of course, than making a med error. That's just totally different than
Yeah,
what we're
this is
talking about.
not exactly the same class, right?
Mhm.
Definitely not. There was another one that I had read about that kind of had weird associations with the patients that she killed as well. Her name was Jane Topin. I don't know if you read about her, but her dream was to essentially kill more people than anyone else. And she had a nickname. They called her the Jolly Jane, and she confessed up to 33 murders in 1901. So she would inject her patients again using doses like lethal doses of morphine, and then she would climb into bed with them and hold on to them as they passed. Um, she also described it that it was sexually thrilling to take people to the brink of death, bring them back, and then kill them. So very similar to that other killer that you were speaking of earlier, which is like super bizarre. That's why I know it's like this is not a nursing problem. This is just like a sociopathic serial killer problem.
Right, and it just happens that nurses have access to so much medication and access to people that
Right.
are really vulnerable. So, it just sets up the
Absolutely. Yeah.
situation that they're able to kill more.
Right. It's kind of like having the wherewithal, right? You have access to drugs, like you said. They have access to medical equipment. Um, but really, at the end of the day, these people they're serial killers, just like the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, right? They're people who are looking to satisfy their psychotic urges by harming other people.
Mhm. So the next person I looked up was someone that's pretty infamous in Ontario. It's Elizabeth Wetloffer. So if you are a nurse on Ontario, you would know about this case. It's actually such a high profile case that when I looked it up on the College of Nurses of Ontario, there's a whole page dedicated just to her. So when you click on her name, there's a link that says, look here for all the details as to why her license was revoked. So she was a nurse that lived in the Woodstock area. She was accused of killing 8 people. There was another 8, I believe, that was attempted murder, and then 4 aggravated assault. And they basically like. So just to back up, for my research for this episode, I actually watched this show on Netflix called Nurses Who Kill. That's where I got a lot of my research from. So
Right, right.
Amy, you said you've watched this show too, right? I hadn't heard of it before.
Yeah, they have 3 seasons, so I didn't even know that. So when I was like, I watched the first season, and then again when we were talking about doing an episode like that, I did a little bit more research, and they have 3 seasons on Netflix. So I'm like, oh my god, I have so much more to catch up on. But just like it's amazing that they even have like a documentary where it's just like nurses who kill. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they'd be able to make a documentary on doctors who kill because that's a whole other topic because we've seen that too. But I
Mhm.
mean, I think I was just surprised that they have enough episodes for like three
Well, if you
seasons.
look at the 3rd season, they start running out of nurses and they start talking about, like, paramedics and other people in the healthcare profession. So,
Oh,
it's like the
okay.
first 2 seasons are the ones that are really good. Anyway, when I watched this Netflix series and the episode on Elizabeth Wetloffer, they went really into like her upbringing, her childhood, how she became a nurse. They interviewed people that knew her in childhood, so they really like tried to get into the psychological mindset of what she was like. And they said, you know, in school she got teased a lot. When she got older, she kind of became that kind of person that threw a temper tantrum if she didn't get her way. Um, she first went to school. She went to a Bible college for religion and then ended up going into nursing school and became a nurse. And what they said is that she worked at multiple different nursing homes and no one ever suspected anything. So her drug of choice was insulin, which, as we know, especially in long term care, it's pretty accessible. Many patients are on it. It's not a narcotic. Although a lot of places do require a cosign, it's not really as tightly controlled as a lot of other medications. And the other thing is that once you inject it into someone, it's not like it necessarily stays in their system long enough like morphine. It's just it's really hard to test once someone dies if they passed away from an insulin overdose or even checking for hypoglycemia. So what they said is that she started to show up to work intoxicated. She was fired from her first job for a med error, but they didn't disclose what that error was. Nothing was ever reported to the college. And then she ended up checking into rehab at one point because she was having issues with drugs. She, like I said, started to show up to work drunk. And it wasn't until she got admitted to CAMH, which is a mental health institution in Ontario, and disclosed to a psychiatrist what she had done, that they were forced by law to report this to the college and also start a criminal investigation. And I guess throughout all this, there was nothing really made available to the public until she made her confession because I guess for some reason the records leading up to this were not made public, I guess for confidentiality, or I'm not really sure what the reasoning was. But the really scary thing was that they launched an official investigation into this case, into the long term care system in general. And what they said was that if she hadn't disclosed anything to that psychiatrist, this would never have come to light. All the people that she killed and tried to kill, there was nothing really that was raising red flags to anybody that she worked with. So that's the really scary part, I think.
Yeah, but I thought I remember seeing like when I did check her out on the CNO that there were several complaints to the college about her related to, particularly related to the use of medications, and that it was really only until after she was convicted that the college suspended her license. So it just kind of calls into question, like, there are these various different organizations that are out there to protect the public, and like did this organization or do other organizations do a good job of identifying people who are putting others at risk, whether it is unintentionally or intentionally, right? Like I think that is what for me was the scariest part of this whole Elizabeth Wetloffer case, the fact that she was she was able to continue to practice for so long with a record like hers, and the public had no real knowledge of it until really she was convicted of indeed murdering these 8 individuals. Like it's just for me, I'd want to know,
Mhm.
like, what if I had my loved one there, and there are various reports that this one particular nurse or particular whomever had all these college complaints against them. So I think that that accountability piece for me was somewhat unnerving because
Mhm.
that could have been your grandma or your grandfather or It's just how do we keep track of this? Like, how do we do a better job of monitoring and making sure, really doing those checks and balances to make sure that the people that are out there looking after people's family members and loved ones aren't sociopaths
Yeah, and
or
I think
psychopaths,
that just speaks to
right?
the systemic issues of the nursing shortages, and especially in long-term care. It's not, I guess, the first place that most people want to work, so it's already not really appealing, and then there's all these shortages, so I feel like they kind of they just take who they can get because it's really not that popular of a place to work, but it's not an excuse by any means. And, I don't know if you ever used to read The Standard. It was like this monthly or quarterly magazine,
Yeah, yeah,
and if you flip to the back, it always talks about the hearings that, nurses that were either had their license revoked or suspended or had some sort of discipline that was assigned to them based on the situation they were in. I used to look at those all the time to see if I knew anybody, and luckily I didn't, but there's always someone in there, so I feel like there is a process and it's not perfect, but definitely allowing someone to go on for this long without the checks and balances raises some concerns.
yeah. And I think afterwards there was like I don't know if it was like a coroner's inquest or whatnot. I can't remember, to be honest. But there were several recommendations to be made, I guess, to the college to investigate these things further. And I guess I know this sounds somewhat morbid, but if you think about it, um, like long-term care for people who are sociopaths or psychopaths, it's like a perfect breeding ground and opportunity for harm to occur or exist, right? Because these people are very vulnerable. They are most likely elderly or might have other I guess ailments like dementia, or having some form of not necessarily a mental illness, but like maybe like a brain injury or something, where advocating for themselves could be very, very difficult, right? I mean, I think she was saying that the patients that she went after were mean to her, or she didn't like them.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I mean, I think with some of the even attempted cases, even some of the family members got some vibes from her that were like, quite unsettling. So it's just I don't know. I think particularly where there is more vulnerability, there should be a lot more checks and balance in terms of, maybe there is a mental health type of test that's taken for people who work with neonates or who work with elderly people, to ensure that, like, I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing things out, but just to make sure that
Mhm. I think there should be too.
you kind of try to be a little bit more preventative, right? Like maybe there should be like a some form of a personality test, or like I don't know what types of questions that they put on. I guess they'd have to turn to the experts in psychology for that. But just I mean, to really like I guess like if you think about like policing, they probably have certain things like that where they ask certain types of questions to see like, hey, are you likely to hurt this type of person because of your personality, or like, how would you handle this type of situation?
I feel
And I
like
mean,
they
of
should.
course, they would
I don't know
provide.
if they do. I can't say for sure if they do, but I think anybody that works closely with people in vulnerable situations should have a psychological assessment, and it's not like the type of test you can study for. So people just have to be tested, right? We're not trying to help people cheat to pass. It's like making sure that you are actually in this profession for the right reasons.
Absolutely. And I mean, the fact that we are dealing with vulnerable people who are in a position of, you know, they're not well. I think it's even more important for us to make sure that we have those checks and balances in place. So very scary indeed, right? Like I mean,
And I think the thing is that autopsies usually aren't performed on the elderly. So once, I guess, like to prove that it was this person, right, that killed the victims, you have to prove it. And in order to do that, a lot of times you need to test the body, but sometimes there is no body, or it's been so long that you can't test for whatever medication it was. So it's really
right.
unfortunate. Like I think if If she had been working with a younger population, she might have been caught a lot sooner.
I wholeheartedly think she would have been caught sooner. And the thing is, like, if you think about that, like it's 8 victims that she confessed to, but who knows to say whether there's more, right? Especially if you are in a psychopathic state. I think many people who are serial killers, they say, they're like, yes, I've killed 7 people. They're like, oh, maybe it was 8 or 9, or maybe it was 14, and then the number continues to change. But that also could be because of their psychopathy, right? Because some of these people like that sensationalization as well, and that type of attention. But I mean, it's kind of like, I just feel like with her particular case, I feel that there probably was more. If she attempted with 4 and she abused 5 and she killed 8, like I feel like there might be more, but
Mhm.
I could be wrong. But before we close this episode out, um, there was another killer that I kind of wanted to touch on, because they consider this particular nurse one of the most prolific serial killers in New Jersey's history ever. Um, and this particular person, his name is Charles Cullen. So I don't know if you've heard of this case, because I actually remember hearing about this when this was going on. So he spent 16 years as a serial killing nurse before he was finally caught in 2003. He actually admitted to killing upwards of 40 patients, again, using lethal injections, probably related to opioids, or I can't remember what it was that they said, but some form of a lethal injection. Um, and they also said, like, with his case, um, they don't feel he's the only one to blame for his actions, because they said that there were countless instance, where there were many medical professionals along the way that could have stopped him from harming patients. So maybe the moral of this episode in this story is, if you see something untoward and you're getting heebie jeebie vibes, maybe there is something messed up that's happening, right?
Mhm.
So, like, I think they said he was actually, after he was caught, most of the 7 hospitals he worked for reported that they had suspected that he was actually hurting people within his care. So it's very unclear as to why they didn't, like, reach out to the police, or at least let their concerns be known to, like, the licensing board. Um,
Yeah, and it
but
kind of
essentially,
just
he
I
said,
just kind of think like, okay, he's been a nurse for 16 years. He's worked at 7 hospitals. So one of the commonalities I've noticed, at least in a few of the cases we talked about, the more recent ones, is that people move jobs a lot. And like Elizabeth Wetloffer, the Niels H, the German nurse, this nurse, I think 7 hospitals in 16 years is a lot, don't you? Like it's more than average.
well, like, I think about the job interview question, right, where they ask you, why did you leave your last whatever, your last career, or your last position? And I feel like if you looked at someone's CV and you saw that they moved around so much, for me it would be, at least for me, it would be a little bit of a red flag. I'd be like, it just not, like, there's a difference between, climbing. So for example, you have excuse me, a variety of different types of jobs, and each job, then you are actually, like, maybe climbing the executive or corporate ladder. So maybe you're going from educator, you do 2 years there, to, like, clinical manager, to, like, director. And yes, there's a lot of change within that. I think that shows a different progression and growth. But I think if, like, let's say you live in Toronto and you've worked a year at Mount Sinai, you worked a year at Toronto General, you worked a year at, and you, like, moved around all the GTA hospitals, and now are moving out. It just, and you still live within the same relative bounds. It just, it puts a queasy feeling in my stomach.
Right, and it's not like I could see if you were moving because you wanted to try a different unit, but it's like when you move from one hospital to another, and you always work in the same unit. So, for example, Emerge or ICU, I think people that are serial killers do it because they don't want anybody to know them well enough to know what they're doing. So once they feel like
Right.
they're
I want
close
to
to
get
getting
cut.
caught, they just think I need to move, I need to be somewhere new so that I can start over where nobody knows me and I can just continue to fly under the radar.
Yeah. Super, super messed up. So I think, like, for those of you listening, like, if you've ever encountered a nurse or someone else that you're working with, it doesn't necessarily have to be a nurse, but, someone in healthcare where, you know, they see, like, you've caught them on several occasions looking like they might have been aggressive, or like they might have actually hurt a patient. um, don't let those feelings go like unannounced, right? I think we have intuition for a reason, right? It's that time where maybe you're out late at night and you're putting your groceries away, or sorry, you're not your groceries, your garbage out or something, and you get that bad vibe from someone coming down the street that you've never seen in your neighborhood. Maybe that's telling you, and then you go inside, that's telling you that something seems untoward, something's wrong. And I think that people need to try to trust their gut a little bit more, and not be fearful that you're tattling. Like, I think if you notice something that seems strange, maybe approach someone else and say, hey, like, have you noticed this? And then, if it's continuing, to kind of let your supervisor or your manager or director know. And I don't think it's ratting out your colleague, because obviously, if at the end of the day there's nothing happening, then nothing happens, right? They're not going to just call them into a room and be like, oh, your colleague thinks that you're a murderer. But I think that sometimes we just have to trust our gut and say, hey,
Mhm.
I've seen this particular person be really aggressive with patients, and, like, maybe we should, you know maybe this person needs more support, or whatever the case may be. Or if, maybe it is that one person that's always in the room for a code, that they're like the angel of death type of thing. I don't know. I think we just have to try to trust our gut a little bit more.
Mhm. And I think that it's more like hindsight is 2020. So sometimes with serial killers, all of these people come out of the woodwork saying, "Oh yeah, we thought that too." But if nobody says anything to start with, then we all sort of keep these feelings to ourselves. And in my experience, whenever I feel strongly about someone one way or another, and I say it out loud, all these people tend to agree with me. So when I feel a certain way about someone, chances are other people feel the same way, but we're just all not saying anything because we don't want to rock the boat.
Right. And I mean, I think the other thing about like sociopaths and psychopaths that are prolific and that are known murderers. So, like, for example, I think Ted Bundy was a good example. Is he was highly educated, he was attractive, he knew how to sweet talk people, but there was always something insidious about him that people did notice, but they just couldn't put their finger on. And yeah, he was crazy as hell. So I mean, I think, again, just trusting your gut, and
Hmm.
yeah, not be quiet about it.
All right.
Not saying that you're running down the hall saying that that person's a killer, but just, if you see something that seems a little bit off, maybe just kind of tell somebody at least.
Right. Anything else you want to add, Amy, before we wrap up?
No, I think we kind of touched on a lot of the main ones that we know of, but it'd be interesting, like, if people listen to this episode, that maybe there's cases that we haven't talked about, and they want to share some things with us or talk to us. I think I would love to hear that feedback.
Hmm. So, you've been listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. If you like what you hear, please share, subscribe, like, listen, let your friends know. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. You can also follow us along on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Thank you for listening, and